introduce you now. Hi, everybody. Hello? Yes, thank you. So today we have Dr. Harley Balzer. He's emeritus professor at Georgetown University. He spent many years he's been many times to Russia and spent full years in 70s and 80s in Russia. In early 90s, Dr. Balzer was executive director and chairman of the board of Soros International Science Foundation. He was a member of the governing council of the Basic Research and Higher Education Program and member of the board of trustees of the European Universities at St. Petersburg. And he held positions, he retired from his position of the Department of Government School of Foreign Services and Department of History at Georgetown University and was appointed director of Georgetown Russian Area Studies Program in '87. And I can kind of continue and go on, but here, Dr. Balzer with us to present his new book, Failure, Russia Under Putin, and thank you very much for being here. Go ahead.
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for coming on what's a beautiful afternoon when a lot of us wouldn't mind being outside. What I'm going to talk about is mostly from my own chapter in this book, Failure, Russia Under Putin, co-edited with Stephen Fisher. And it has chapters by 11 other colleagues. The book itself is really aimed at showing all the things Putin said he was going to do creatively, positively, that he failed to do. We did not touch domestic politics. We did not touch the other things where his anti-democratic and I should also, I've had Russians, when I criticize Putin, say, why are you anti-Russian? And my answer was, I'm actually very pro-Russian. I mean, I did give away a lot of money in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s to support science and education. And first in the former Soviet Union, then just in Russia, worked with the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Science. So my answer is, I think it's really Putin who's anti-Russia. And I am certainly not anti-Russians. So what I'm going to try to do, and it's a lot to cover, the chapter is twice as long as anything else in the book, is 9 of his failures, which 3 of them come in demography, health, science, technology, and the economy. And in every one of them, things that Putin promised, and things, some cases repeatedly included in his inaugural address every time he got reelected, that maybe made a few small gains, but pretty much went away after 2012. Putin started talking about demography in 1999 when he was prime minister, and there are 3 big issues in demography. One is natural population increase or decline. In Russia, it's been mostly decline. You can see the numbers from up through 2007. It was only in 2006 that he followed through on a promise to introduce some policies that would achieve something. And after 2007, they did have a program, maternity capital, to pay women to have more children. There's a big debate in the Russian academic community over whether that worked at all. It coincided with a 10-year increase in the number of women in the 20 to 35 age group. That's when most women have their children. So whether the maternity capital really accounted for more births or whether the greater number of women explains it, is an open question. The maternity capital continued after 2015 and the number of births went down. And nobody in the world so far has increased their country's birth rate by simply paying women. You've got to do a lot more things. We can talk about that if you want to. Since 2015, the fertility rate has gone down. It peaked, if you believe them, in 2017 at 1.78. That's the last year for which, 2015, last year for which I have good statistics. The numbers in 2017, 2023 are almost certainly fudged. The numbers here are more likely. And most serious, the new demographic program to 2035 says they're going to get to 1.6 in 2030 and 1.8 in 2035. So that's pretty much where they were back here in 2015, 20 years later. And of course, for a lot of women, the maternity capital program is a serious problem. This is one of my favorite photos. This is a building that says maternity capital. It also says heroes of the Rodina, are born and, or sorry, not born, they're made. We turn them into heroes. That contradiction, have children who are going to be killed in war is a serious part of the programs these days. The second part of the demographic program is immigration. And Russia, since 1991, has had a real problem. The people who are leaving are generally highly educated, talented, skilled, and the people coming in are, for the most part, low-level workers. In agriculture, construction in particular. There are exceptions, physicians in particular, from some of the former Soviet republics. But overall, it's been a problem. And since 2014, when Putin took back Crimea, they've mostly been from the former Soviet Union. After February 24, 22, when he started the war in Ukraine, it shrank to just 5 countries from Central Asia. And after 2023, half of them were from Tajikistan. When the Crocus terror event happened in early 24, that really cut off the flow even from Tajikistan. They are still getting some, but they have also been impressing them into the military. People who came as guest workers have been rounded up in batches. If it looks familiar, we're seeing it here too now. And shipped off to the war. Initially, they were not given uniforms. They were sent, in some cases, wearing sandals or flip-flops, told to get their own equipment. And the losses have been extreme. And of course, if you're not getting the immigrants, you've got serious personnel shortages. In science, so many people left that there's now about a 30% deficit in filling jobs in scientific research. Blue-collar workers, last year about this time, were short about 2.7 million. The military takes 10,000 to 30,000 people per month to send to the front. And the result is that the bonuses that the government has to pay to get those people to fight are rapidly increasing their income. They're sending some of it back to their families, but it means that the labor costs are going up. Means companies have to pay higher wages to get people to come work for them. And those salaries and bonuses mean increasing inflation. And it's a vicious circle. They're now finally this year trying to cut back on it. It's not clear how easy that's going to be if they want to keep supplying troops to the front. This is one of Putin's answers to the labor shortage. He's thrown off several. He keeps saying we'll get more immigrants. That may not be so easy. And they've also brought in guest workers from places like India, Nepal, Bangladesh. And those people have been brought to Russia supposedly on a contract to work in the civilian economy in Russia. When they arrive, they've had their passports confiscated, and they have been shipped off to the front to fight. And when they finally get their hands on mobile phones, they call home, tell people what's going on. And relations with India, Nepal, and some other countries have really gone backwards as a result of that. Now, the Russians will insistently tell you that they're not the only place in the world that has a low birth rate. You know, the worst is Korea, where it's about 0.7. And Koreans are very worried. In the United States, we're below replacement level, and Trump is not doing much to change it. But in Russia, the real problem is not the birth rate. That can be fixed with migration and sane policies. The real problem is life expectancy. They resist best practices in a host of medical areas. They have lost a lot of people due to cardiovascular disease, alcohol, and accidents. If you're drinking and working, you're likely to encounter trouble on the job. Domestic violence is pretty serious. Annually, it's about 15,000 women who are killed by their spouses, and about 5,000 men who are killed by their spouses. The health program and higher incomes meant some gains between 2015 and 2021, 22. Now that's over because of the war. There's no reliable data, but the best estimate is it's about 1 million casualties. About 200,000 of those are fatalities, which is a lot. Maybe, they claim life expectancy improved because older Russians died of COVID. That undercuts the claim that they really didn't have that many deaths from COVID. The best estimate is that there are about 1.3 million excess deaths in 2020 and 2021, and 1 million of them are COVID. We had 1 million COVID deaths in this country, but we've got double the population of Russia. So they had the highest numbers of just about any developed country. The health system is also a problem. Living standards have declined pretty regularly despite all that money going into the bonuses for soldiers. Crimean sanctions meant counter-sanctions by Russia that made food more expensive and harder to get. Putin claims that it really destroyed Europe, and the data shows that's just not true. The Health National Project is supposed to fix the problems, focuses on equipment, not preventive care. A lot of diseases that they thought they had conquered are now back. AIDS is serious, tuberculosis, cholera, recently meningitis, something that they thought they had totally eradicated is reappearing. And that's a threat to the population. And again, the real problems are the lifestyle, the alcohol, the drugs, risky behavior, accidents, and the cardiovascular disease from bad diet. In 1999, Russian men were dying at about 4 times the rate of men in Europe. They've improved that. That's now down to about 2 times. Russian women were dying at the rate of European men. That's also improved. But it's also gotten better in Europe, so the gains are relative. And they did have, by far, the worst per capita COVID mortality rate of any major country. The education system has suffered massively. It's always been uneven. You know, they do have excellent elite schools, but the drop-off to the far less performing is very rapid compared to Europe or America or Japan or Korea. In the 1990s, things were chaotic. They doubled the number of higher educational institutions between 1993 and 1998 when they were broke. So these institutions were created, but they didn't have much in the way of financing or faculty. They've now closed about half of them. They did make some real efforts to open up to the outside world and to introduce the Bologna system, which would have made the degrees in Russia comparable with the degrees people earned in Europe, and would have allowed Europeans to work in Russia and Russians to work in Europe. By now, they do not like that. The last thing they want is Russians leaving for any reason. In 2015, after the start of the sanctions from annexation of Crimea, they changed from internationalization to sovereignty. Started to have a new curriculum, a lot more military attention. Now they realize sovereignty isn't quite what they wanted to peddle to the world. It's leadership. That Russia will become the scientific and technical leader of the globe. They're kind of forgetting about other countries like China and quite a few more. The quality of what they do has really gone down. The leadership, when Putin was asked a month or two ago where Russia was going to be a leader, he said, well, we could sell auto parts and maybe collaborate on aircraft production, which does not strike me as a high-tech scheme. The other problem with Russian education is ethical. A couple of people I knew at the Higher School of Education who now are outside Russia call it predatory. In kindergarten, parents are called and told that if they do not make payments to the teacher, they will not treat their children nicely. If you want to get into a good elementary school or high school, you pay. If you want good grades, you pay. In the university, the same thing. There are some exceptions, but on average, no. And of course, now the war is dominating. There's military training at all levels. Veterans get preference in education admissions and employment. Some of them are being appointed governors. There's a new curriculum everywhere, and funding for new students, so you don't have to pay for your higher education, is only for science and technology. This is an old Russian tradition called shparagalki, cheat sheets. And in high schools, the tradition was that the teachers would leave the room during exams so the students could pull out their cheat sheets without worrying about it. It's improved a little bit with technology for the students. You can bring your phone. And there's also the basic version, advantage for the women doing this, obviously. And one of the times I did this talk, the people running the program asked me to please remove the next few slides. So if pictures of children with guns bother you, close your eyes for a couple of minutes. But this is the curriculum. And I guess, there are people who would like to see that here because then the students could shoot back at the active shooters in their classrooms. And it's at all levels. The one of these that makes any sense at all is the drone construction training. Finally, science. The myth of Sputnik really dies hard. It is vanishing. The last space effort by Russia was a shot that crashed on the far side of the moon. There are declines in the number of scientific publications, scientific workers, citations, international rankings. The one realm that seems to be a growth industry is fraud. Russia is shrinking in publications. It is going up in co-authorship because there'll be 7 or 8 people signing onto an article to get credit for publishing it. And there's been a lot of challenge to the research results, a lot of articles that have been pulled back. And Russia's not the only place in the world where you have these problems. You know, there was a German minister who had to resign because of plagiarism in his dissertation. But that's usually as high as it goes. In Russia, Putin has a degree in economics from what used to be the Mining Institute and is now the Mining University in St. Petersburg. It was written by the rector, typed by his daughter, who is alienated and now living outside Russia and spills the story. If you've got that at the top, and Igor Sechin and Zubkov both also defended dissertations at the same institute in the next 2 years after Putin. So they really created a mill. About 1/3 of the Duma deputies have these kinds of dissertation credentials. Part of the problem in science, beside the fraud, the cheating, is a massive difference between what they put into it, what they get out of it. These are from 2021, which is the last year we have relatively reliable data. And essentially, Russia ranked 5th in the number of scientific workers. The Soviet Union used to be number 1. They ranked 10th in spending for science. That was only a small share of their GDP. They ranked 41st in that, which tells you they could have spent a lot more. The results were that they were number 47 in Global Innovation Index, number 19 in citations. They're now pretty much off the scope in citations. They're not publishing as much abroad, and people are not accepting their articles as easily. And the data, I don't need to make you go through all of these statistics from 2010. To me, the most interesting one is the number of graduate students has been about cut in half. The number of graduate students completing their degrees has also gone down. And most interesting, the number defending a dissertation to get their degree is almost off the charts. I mean, it's, you know, you don't have to do that anymore. You just take your classes, take a couple of exams, and you walk. Now, all of that looks pretty bad to me. The technology is probably the worst. And my new book is going to be called Technocide, How Vladimir Putin Stole Russia's Future. It's always been the weakest realm. They did well in basic science. They did less well in innovation, technology development. Sputnik was the exception, in some ways the exception that proves the rule. And since the Soviet Union ended, their space program and satellite programs have been in serious trouble. War has increased the funding. I call it the Willie Sutton principle for the economy. I realize the younger generation may not know about Willie Sutton. He was a famous bank robber in the 1930s, and when they finally caught him and were putting him on trial, one day a journalist asked him, "Why do you rob banks?" And Sutton looked at the guy as if he was from Mars or something, and his answer is, "That's where the money is." These days in Russia, the military-industrial complex, the defense sector, is where the money is. And that's where the corruption is, in massive doses. You know, they're not alone. You know, we had our $600 hammers. We have the whole Fat Leonard mess. In Russia, the Sarmat missile was the major thing Putin showed off back in 2018 when he did that election video about Russia's new hyperweapons. And the Sarmat is the one that was supposed to be able to go like 10 or 15 times the speed of sound and attack America over the South Pole, where we didn't have the missile defenses like we do over the North Pole. And he showed it off, and then no test launch. 2023, 2019, 2020, 2021. Finally, after the war started in 2022, they did a test, and it worked. But, you know, Russian defense protocol, you need a minimum of 6 successful tests in a row to certify a missile for use. They didn't get there. The next 2 failed, and the one after that blew up the launch pad. So now they can't test it. And the reason for the delay was that initially they appropriated money, about 3 billion rubles for the testing, and within 24 hours, a third of it disappeared. They stopped counting the opaque electronic transfers at 18. And it took a while before they were willing to give that company back the cash to do it again. The number, if you read the Russian press, Kommersant's my favorite, there's almost every day a story about some kind of crime and theft in the defense industry. Back in 2018, Putin went to Kazan to see, where they showed him the aircraft factory, Gorobunov, that had just gotten a piece of equipment, a machine tool, from Kazan, from Moscow Oblast in Russia, which was touted as the high point of Russian import substitution. And immediately about 15 engineers who would watch the video of Putin's visit called in to say, no, 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 that's a piece of Italian equipment that was sold to a company in Moscow Oblast, repainted, and sold to Kazan for more than double what the people in Moscow Oblast paid for it. That is Russian import substitution. They get really pathetic returns on investment, and the entire import substitution program, which even Russian specialists had to say, look, import substitution is not buying equipment from another country. It's making it yourself. 3 and 5 trillion rubles, and there has been almost no improvement in the high-tech sector. Russia compared to China is really inefficient. I guess China in 2016 ranked number 29 in what they spent. They improved to number 25 5 years later. Russia improved by 1 notch. In terms of output, China did a lot better. It was up to number 7. Russia went from 47 to 52. And the efficiency ratio speaks for itself. And now there is a myth that a lot of journalists and analysts have focused on, that the sanctions have really failed. They've been a disaster. The media focuses on evasion, but it has had a serious impact in Russia, including on the economy. But the most serious has been in technology. They're losing technology that was normal in the Soviet Union. And some of it has stayed in places like Ukraine and Belarus, and they're having to get it from there because they don't make it themselves anymore. Putin said sanctions make you stronger. If that's the case, why did he say that one of his demands for peace in Ukraine is to end the sanctions? He loves to double talk. And this is the quote from Putin, that they're going to have problems. He was correct, they're going to have problems. This is work done at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, which is probably their leading center for study of science and technology, among a lot of other things. And it shows what has happened just in the 4 years from 2018 to when the war started, 2022. Using imports and having analogs, the analogs have gone down. The lack of Russian analogs has gone up. Imports of details, components, assemblies, same story. Russia going through the roof in what they don't make. And raw materials, other materials, the same story. They have lost their ability to do high technology. They can make basic consumer goods, but now most of those are being made in China. Russian companies build it using Chinese factories. So finally, the economy. Serious trouble. Nabulina, the head of the central bank, has been performing miracles. Last couple of years, Gazprom, Russian railroads, and the coal industry have all had major losses. The government in Russia now pays for almost everything, which is scary. Businesses can't get credit. There's a lot of complaint in the press from private companies that say that they're not being able to access credit at a rate they can afford. Only insiders are getting it. The corruption is massive. The economy is going to be threatened by a lot of oil and gas in the next 3 years. OPEC is already talking about yet another price decrease. The price is going to go down. We're in drill baby drill mode here. And China is touted as their great partner. Putin and Xi clearly have a relationship, but the Chinese pay for nothing. And the new announcement of Power of Siberia 2 shows this. The really important issues about payment and timing have not been settled, and no indication when they will be. So Putin on the economy looks like President Canute, right? He's going to turn back the crisis. His finance minister and economics deputy minister at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum said they had a real problem. German Greff says they're in technical recession. Greff was one of the people who was with Putin back in St. Petersburg in the early 90s. He runs Russia's most important bank. On the 12th of February, Valentina Matvienko, who used to be governor of St. Petersburg and is now the head of the Federation Council, the upper house, the Senate, basically, in the Russian parliament, started giving a speech about the serious economic problems in the country. She got through most of it, but within 4 hours, the entire speech and the record of it were taken down. I was smart enough to have copied them off the internet just in time. So I've got the documents. And instead it was replaced with a talk by the same person congratulating Russia's central bank on the economic miracle that they had performed. If you look on the web now, you will not find a trace of the mention of Matvienko's talk, which is scary. And if you think about Western sources that have already had that removed by whoever did it. And Putin, the Canute reference, says simply he will not allow this to happen. How he stops it, I do not know. Finally, the last thing I'll do, and I just got this after the book had come out. A researcher who works in an institute in the Urals division of Russia's Ministry of the Interior people responsible for criminal behavior, sort of keeping things in order within the country, wrote an article in a major law journal that was published where he talked about the problems created, first of all, by the prisoners Prigozhin and then Putin had released from prison, compared it to what happened before World War II, when the Russian Supreme Court issued an edict saying they would allow forgiving prisoners of their crimes if they enlisted in the military. What's interesting is that order was issued 2 weeks before Hitler invaded, which suggests that there was a really interesting argument going on within the Soviet government about how much to trust Hitler. And Stalin was on the side of the people saying he promised me he wouldn't do it, which is why he disappeared for 2 weeks after the war began. So one problem is the Prigozhinites, the real hardcore criminals. Before World War II, they limited it to nonviolent criminals, supposedly, although you might question that and what we know about the Soviet Union. Anything's possible. But at least they said it was generally going to be the nonviolent ones. These guys are coming back. They are recidivistic. They're repeating their murders and rapes and thefts. Some of them have actually been arrested again, put on trial, and asked the judge to let them go back to Ukraine and fight again to get another pardon. Meanwhile, the ordinary soldiers who are fighting, a lot of whom have been there for 2 years, if they survived, are being paid these enormous bonuses to fight, and they'll never earn that much money when they go home. There's nothing these guys are trained to do that could get them $2,000, $3,000 a month. So if they go home, they're going to take a big cut in what they can live on and send to their families. But they are trained in weapons and explosives, and those can be useful ways to threaten or blackmail or steal, and it's happening. And the ministry is so upset that even Putin has now said, we've got to look into this. I was wondering if the guy who wrote the article was going to disappear, but it seems that, in fact, this was something that was coordinated. Putin acknowledged it. They're not discussing the war cost of fighting corruption, helping survivors, incorporating the new territories, repairing the damage, continuing the war, running a massive global disinformation program, which is why we can't find out about Matvienko, and converting the economy to civilian needs, which they botched in the early 90s, and they're going to botch again. So thank you for spending a week. And I will be happy to try to answer any questions people have, and there ought to be another microphone. Yes, there is. Unfortunately, I am temporarily less mobile, so if somebody else could pass it around, so we can get your hosts back. Thank you. And the publisher of the book has sent us a flyer. The American Political Science Association annual meeting started yesterday. And in honor of it, I have flyers. You can get a 35% discount on the book. So it's down from $29 to $20 if you want it. I've got a bunch of them up here, and I can give them to you afterwards if you're interested. And questions, please.
Yeah, well, since the
and please speak up.
Since the microphone landed with me, I'll start my question since the microphone landed with me. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you.
Okay. First off, great information, great analysis. My question really is with the, as you referenced, not much coming out of there since the war with Ukraine started. How are you getting your information now that you're using?
Well, I talked to people who have left, including ones who have left more recently. But remarkably, the Russian media especially the press, has been a pretty reliable source of a lot of valuable material. And my analysis of why is that they understand that Russian business will collapse completely if there's no information. So they're trying to come up with a version of the truth that will satisfy the business community, even if it means people like me can read it. And much to my amazement, the academic journals in science and technology have been still pretty critical. I mean, that chart I showed you about the decline in Russian ability to have technology in a whole bunch of areas was initially published by the Higher School of Economics on their website, then put in a report on their website, and it finally ended up in Vопроsi Ekonomiki, which is the #1 economics journal in the country, somewhat revised, toned down. And the Higher School of Economics website said, if we've removed this from the website, you shouldn't cite it. Sorry, but I'm going to. But the Russian sources are still remarkably good. And in addition, there are about a half dozen Russian news sites that were declared undesirable organizations. Things like the Moscow Times, Meduza, several others. And they still publish amazing stuff, and they have their journalists working in Russia sending out material without putting their name on it, of course. And they tell you a lot. So, the stories about the criminals coming back and committing crimes are covered massively by these people. And if you want to know how many people have died from any particular place in Russia, all you need to do is look at the local journals. And there is the ability to get those online. And there are two very good online sources. One of them covers the central press and a lot of other things. Another one covers the regional press. And every city publishes the list, the names and the dates and the information about people who have been killed in the war and come back in coffins. So you can get that number too.
Well, just a quick follow-up then. Along that same line, the economic data, especially that you draw the analysis there that their economy is in bad shape in almost every way. Again, but are you basing that on, is it anecdotal or is it really statistical information you're getting?
It is statistical information. The Russian central bank puts out a bi-monthly report that is full of crucial data, and they do not pull punches. Nagulin understands that if she loses her credibility in the information she puts out, it's all over. So, who else? Are you allowed to ask a question?
Can family participate? I wanted to ask about there's some reporting out of this summit between China, Russia, India in recent days that some of the leaders who were there were talking about, I think it was Xi, and I apologize, I don't recall if it was Modi or Putin, talking about the kind of cryogenic freezing and being able to live to 150 years old. What do you see as Putin's succession plan, if there is one, or is this, what is his day after? Because he's not going to live forever, presumably.
He's going to try.
Yeah.
And the reports of his demise, are probably overstated. It's wishful thinking for a lot of us. The problem in communist countries and any dictatorship is if you appoint a successor, that person has a real incentive to get rid of you and take over sooner, especially if they disagree with something you're doing. And there is evidence that there are a lot of people in Russia's government who are not really thrilled with what Putin's been doing. And in the population, you know, his approval rating is probably closer to 45% than the 70 to 90 that he keeps getting reported by the people who do the, supposedly do the polling in the public. But he has eliminated all of the institutional entities that could remove him from office or make a decision about who replaces him. Trump is trying to do the same thing in this country. Ironically, the only one of the three countries that has a legal mechanism in place to replace a leader is China. She would still have to face a central committee that has the power to remove him if they had the guts to do. And said, the crown goes to, and then nothing came. You can believe that or not as you wish, you know, like Catherine the Great and the Horse and all the other stuff that came out of the 18th century. But there is no formal mechanism. I mean, according to the Constitution, if Putin dies, the prime minister takes over for 3 months and they have an election. That's still intact. Whether it would be obeyed, who knows? But he has not intimated who he would have as his successor. There are jokes that he's hoping that one of the children he's had, not with his wife, but with somebody else, who's a male, might be a possible successor. But no one's got a clue. Anybody who thinks they know is probably lying. Yes.
Thank you, Professor. First of all, I highly doubt nowadays whether in the Central Political Bureau of the Chinese Communist Party, anyone could have the power to replace Xi Jinping, because if you look at the people in this bureau, there are 7. I think maybe 4 of them have the experience of the secretary, plays the role of the secretary of Xi Jinping. And there are actually some cronies of Xi Jinping. They do not have their own personality. And if you look at... They don't have their own personality. They all work as the secretary of Xi Jinping for a period. So their political power comes from Xi. And besides of that, I think if you look at their age, all of them are older than Xi Jinping. That's a sign, maybe in the old Chinese politics, that shows Xi Jinping do not choose them as his successor. So I think that's the problem. But actually I come with a question. You didn't make any much of the assessment of the Russia-China relationship nowadays. So I would like to hear about if you take these variables into your equation, what kind of the result you will get. Thank you.
Okay. Important question. I do have a little section on that in my chapter in the book. I did a report for the Atlantic Council about it a couple of years ago. That's still on their website. And the title of that was Axis of Collusion. It basically, Xi and Putin clearly need each other. They do seem to get along, although whether that's for show, it's hard to tell. It is absolutely clear that both of them understand that there is no other major power of their stature that could stand up to the United States, and that together they really can put pressure on us. And Trump's making it easier. One of my lines for my students the last time I taught was that essentially Putin and Trump are making China great. we're wiping out whole sectors of our own industry and alienating our allies, and Xi is just laughing. But China has not come through with a whole lot in the way of serious assistance for Russia. When the Power of Siberia pipeline was built, the Chinese withdrew from cost sharing. Russia footed the entire bill. Gazprom had to pay for the whole thing. The Russians built, supposedly jointly funded, a station to pump electricity into China. China didn't pay their share. The Russians have screamed at the Chinese in private meetings about the amount of money that China has given to Russia, or invested in Russia, being about 1/8 of what they give to Pakistan. And since the Power of Siberia 2 has been talked about, it has been talked about for years. And again, in the discussion, there has been nothing said about who pays or the exact arrangements, the really key details of the project. So, it could be years. It'll take 5 to 7 years to build anyway. And China really doesn't need Russia's oil or gas much anymore. At a lower price, they're happy to have it, but they've got adequate supplies from elsewhere. They'll take the Russian stuff when it's inexpensive, but I can't imagine them spending 10 or 20 or $30 billion, whatever it takes, to build Power of Siberia 2 when they don't really need it. And the price of gas is going down, almost inevitably. Now, somebody could blow up somebody else's oil wells and change that. But OPEC is increasing production again. New facilities are coming online in Africa in 3 or 4 countries. Venezuela just hit a major finding. A couple of other countries are coming up with stuff. Brazil also found some new deposits. We're more likely to be awash in hydrocarbons 2028 to 2030, and that's going to lower prices, and Trump's drill, Rebbe drill is going to look pathetic compared to China's renewables.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I can't have silence up. Come on, you got to have some complaints here.
Thank you for this. It's just been amazing. As somebody that looks
Can you get the mic closer?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay. Just touch a little bit on the sanctions that you mentioned. You say there's a myth regarding how the media has reported on the sanctions that the Western countries are imposing on Russia. If you can touch on that, and then my next question is, how detrimental are those sanctions in the long run sustenance of Russia's economy?
Okay, well, I think the sanctions are fatal in the long run. Again, for the economy, they are causing perversions that will take quite a while to fix. Distortions, perversions probably too strong a word. But in technology, they have really stopped the ability of Russian companies to innovate. And Russia is going to be dependent on China. In Russia today, after the Lada, the next 9 best-selling automobiles in Russia are Chinese. Heavy trucks, the same thing. Household appliances increasing. Again, when Russians make household appliances, they're now making them in China in Chinese factories. It is serious in electronics, especially chips. And Putin has essentially shot himself in the foot when it comes to the entire IT sector. He has required that Russian businesses and educational institutions switch to Russian hardware and software. The problem there, of course, is that Russia doesn't make all that many chips. There are only a couple of places that do it, and they don't make enough for the military, much less for everybody else. The idea was that there are 2 Russian chips that have been designed in Russia that were going to be made by the Taiwanese leading chip manufacturer, TSMC. Once the war started, that became impossible. So Russia has got chip designs, but nobody to make them. For a while, they were buying Chinese washing machines and other household appliances to take out the chips, because that was the way they could get them going around the sanctions. Now, that's an awfully expensive way to cope with it. And you can't really resell the appliance once you've taken the chips out. So the ability to recover in that realm requires a lot of highly trained individuals and a lot of competition with countries that already know how to do this stuff. And Russia is not in position to get much of either. The Chinese are much too happy selling Russia everything they can to teach the Russians how to make it themselves. And that's a big difference between China and Europe. Before Putin took back Crimea, Russian railroads and a lot of other Russian companies had partnerships with Europe that allowed them to share technology and learn. And the head of Russian railways, Yakunin, who is a real nationalist, he's one of these guys who goes to Mount Athos and prays for Russian Orthodox future for the world, wrote a book chapter in a volume a couple of years ago where he actually said point blank that Siemens was a great partner, the Chinese don't give us a thing. So that's the horse's mouth, and it's in print, in English. Yes?
Thank you, Ben Bangura, Washington-based
Can you
journalist.
speak up a little more?
Yes, sir. As war goes on in Ukraine, do you see any scenario, any red line under which this would turn into NATO, Russia war? And if that happened, how do you see the role of North Korea and China in this?
Well, the Chinese, she would probably give up on Putin if he used a nuclear weapon. That would be a red line for him. I don't see how Putin gets out of this. And the last op-ed I wrote was for the Kiev Post about a month ago during the summit. Putin has put the country on a war footing. Taking it off is going to be really painful and expensive and difficult. He's got 1 million casualties, 200,000 dead. How do you tell your people that was all for nothing? The economy is totally geared to the war, and cutting that back, it's been done. But when the Soviet Union tried it, it really threw the economy into a disaster for 6 years. So it's a problem. And there are people who understand it's a problem. How they get rid of Putin is a big question. And it's not my problem, fortunately, but it's all over, another way, it's all of our problem. But the only way this really gets solved is if somehow somebody changes Putin's mind, he drops dead, on TV when he met with Angela Merkel It was the coldest reception you could imagine. When he met with Putin and Lavrov, the foreign minister, it was buddy-buddy. He rolled out the red carpet for Putin in Alaska. To me, this is incomprehensible. And I don't want to try to speculate in public about what's going on. There are all kinds of rumors about it. One is that we know that Putin had material to blackmail Sobchak, which is how he got to be deputy mayor. We don't know what he's got on Trump, if anything. It may be that Trump has his own reason for, I guess if I'm honest, about my personal view, Trump seems to have a real animosity to China and a real fondness for Putin. China and America together could do a lot. And instead of trying to pry Putin away from China, you ought to be trying to pry China away from Putin. But he does not seem to have any interest in that. And I think it is one of the dumbest stances he could possibly take.
Among many.
I can say a few of the Russian immigrants ask me to predict anything beyond that. And we are seeing a lot of reports of problems. Especially if you add in the regional debt, which the regions cannot possibly cover. And he's trying to make the regions pay for more things, the same way Trump is trying to make the states pay for more things. Nobody thinks they're going to collapse, but if German Greff says they're in a technical recession, I believe him. He runs the most important bank in the country, and he's a real economist. So, I think part of the reason Putin is going hog wild with the attacks in Ukraine are partly to try to get a deal and partly to try to really stop them, because if it goes on another year, he may not be able to maintain the level of the military that he's got. At some point, people are going to say it's not worth dying there, no matter how much money you pay me. And the worst case are the women who are marrying men in their 50s and 60s and convincing them to go fight in Ukraine in the hopes that the Ukrainians will bump them off and they'll get the nice big fat death payment. Yes. And please speak up. I had to switch from my normal hearing aids to a backup pair, and I'm having a little more trouble than usual.
No worries. Thank you for coming and giving this presentation. I really enjoyed it. I had a question about sanctions and whether you think that there's a point with the research that you've done, whether you think there's a kind of a pain threshold at which beyond which Putin is unwilling to take, and whether you've seen anything from either the U.S. or the European allies that comes close to that pain threshold where Putin is no longer really able to tolerate more sanctions and has to start making concessions.
I don't think Putin is feeling any pain. And he will lie about it if he is. I mean, one of my interesting discoveries when you asked about sources, when Europe put the sanctions on Russian food and agriculture after 2014, the seizure of Crimea, Russia came up with counter sanctions. Putin announced that they were going to stop bringing in stuff from Europe, and they did. And he said that Europe was losing $6 billion a year. There's a company that was the only private company that Russia's central bank authorized to do certifications for them. And they did a study of what was really going on. And they found that it took about 8 to 10 months for the global economy to adjust, and that 3 or 4 countries in Latin America and 1 or 2 in the Middle East were sending to Europe what Europe used to get from Russia. And Russia was getting some of what it needed through Belarus and black market transactions. And it was costing Europe maybe $500 million to $1 billion the first year, and then nothing. I was enriching the Latin American and Middle Eastern countries. Whereas, for Russia, the price of food was going up and the quality was going down. And of course, he would never admit that. But again, Russian sources did the analysis and published it. And I think we're starting to see the same thing happening now with the sanctions. Yes, Russia is getting a lot of what it wants, not always what it needs. A lot of it's coming through China, through Turkey, through Belarus, through Kyrgyzstan, but it is intermittent. It's more expensive. Back to the China. After the invasion in February 2022, within 6 months, the shipments of microprocessors from China went from 10% failure to 40%. And the reason was that the established responsible companies in China were worried about secondary sanctions and stopped shipping, whereas the fly-by-night guys said, what the hell? So, the sanctions have hit them in a lot of different ways. They're not going to kill the economy quite yet, although ramping them up on oil and gas and the shadow fleet would be a very smart thing to do. And it is scandalous. The Senate has 87 co-sponsors for a bill. You know it better than I do. And I was thinking whether I could actually afford to send a copy of this book to every single senator. But if you want the PDF of it, I can ship that to you with no problem.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, that'd be excellent.
Does that cover it?
Yes, that covers it. Very good. I appreciate
Next
it.
you. Behind you.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Okay, hi, thank you for your talk. I just wanted to ask a question about import substitution.
About
Import substitution. Do you see any industries potentially having a bounce back where they are creating more import substitution products, or do you see the economic sanctions just tanking all of those possibilities?
Well, again, up to 2018, they talked about import substitution. Then they started talking about leasing and renting and nationalizing factories that other countries would build for them. Who is going to build a factory in Russia? I can't believe I'm saying this right now after what happened the past week. And then turn it over to the Russians to run and compete with them. And of course, there wasn't a whole lot of that. But now, nobody is building factories in Russia. And the Russians cannot do the advanced technology. They can make basic stuff. Their drone production, remember, is all based on the Iranians giving them the technology and helping them build the factory in Kazan, which one of these days the Ukrainians are going to hit with one of their new missiles that they built themselves. And there is not enough R&D going on and not enough capacity or equipment in the technology sector for them to do their own. One example is their GPS system, where they had built it with relatively low-level satellites, and they realized that if they were going to try to upgrade it. They could cut the cost about in half by using high-level satellites. But in order to do that, you have to have what are called RICs, radiation-hardened integrated circuits. In 2018, there was an American businessman in Texas who actually packed up 2 boxes of these radiation-hardened equipment and shipped one to China and one to Russia, and he's now sitting in jail in Texas. And they're now talking about new satellites for GLONASS, the GPS system, but low level because they don't have the high quality product equipment to put into it. Yes.
Thank you for the talk. All of the population decline factors that you talked about, separate from the war, but is there a terminal velocity? Is there a point at which, the society collapses? Or the other way to ask this is, how does this all play out and over what time frame?
Well, at a 1.8 fertility rate, you lose about a quarter of your population every generation. And the United Nations projection is that by the year 2100, Russia's population will be half of what it is today. So that doesn't mean the country falls apart, but not only will it be half of what it is today, the dependency ratio will go through the roof. That is, I didn't put up a population pyramid. It's in the book, in my chapter, but it's also available online. The smallest age group in Russia today is the children up to age 5. That has not happened since 200 years ago, when the mortality rates were so much higher. And that means that when these kids get to be working age, they're going to be supporting a whole lot of pensioners. And we've got the same problem, but nowhere near on that scale. A lot of other countries have it. Korea has it worse than anybody. They're already trying to figure out how to cope with it. Japan has it, and they're bringing in emigres. Finally, it took them 20 years longer than it should have, but they finally figured out that that's what they need. Again, nobody solves the demographic problem with money. Paying women to have children has never worked anywhere for the long term. So, does it mean Russia will collapse? No, but you got to cover 11 time zones. You're not going to be fighting wars with a population that size.
But if I may, just quick, short follow-up, but you talked about demographic decline that is similar in other countries, but there's compounding factors with Russia, right? The technology vacuum, the brain drain, the poor education.
And the adult mortality.
So are those accelerating forces that kind of
that all makes it worse? The adult mortality and the fact that a lot of women have made a decision they're not going to have children. I mean, the Soviet Union and even the couple of decades after, the main birth control mechanism was abortion. And it was not unusual for a woman to have 7 abortions in her lifetime because they didn't have decent birth control. Since the war started, the number of women who have asked to be sterilized so they don't have to have children has grown considerably. And also, the most interesting thing to me is that the Russian medical profession has started to write reports about male infertility, which was unheard of in the Soviet Union and the macho 90s, and even Putin's first decade. But it turns out when they started testing Russian men, the number of them who, from lifestyle problems in their teens and 20s, had made themselves infertile turned out to be remarkably high. So the number of people capable of having children is something they're never going to really know, but it's shrinking.
You draw very
Okay. And then we can talk. I'm sorry. I'll go on, or if people want to, break up and do this informally, we can do it that way too. Go ahead.
you draw very bleak picture of Russia, but aren't these things common in a whole Europe because the population growth rate very low because white people just don't want to have children. I mean, it's a common phenomenon everywhere. So, and then Putin said that, I forget after how many years, but he said it would be a majority Muslim country, Russia, like after 20 years or whatever. So Muslim produce a lot of children. If it's going to be a majority Muslim country, then don't you think that this population growth problem won't be there anymore? Thanks.
I'm not sure I got it. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Putin talks about traditional values, and the majority of people in Russia who believe in traditional values are not Russian. The Muslims, the people who are in Siberia who have their own regional religions, Buddhism, shamanism, and there has been a constant drumbeat of the Muslims are going to take over, and first in the Soviet Union, which is where it was a more real threat because you had all those Central Asian countries. But now the Muslims are about 13% of the population. They do have a higher birth rate. Chechnya may now be the only Russian region out of the 85 that has at least replacement level fertility. And two of that. But how long that lasts, nobody knows. It's been going down. It used to be higher. There's a great book that will be coming out by someone from Chechnya who has really written about the response to their being exiled during World War II and the fight to get back, and the sense that this ethnicity is really challenged in its survival and therefore has had the high birth rate. But even there, it's going down. But the Muslims are not going to be a majority anytime soon. There was some concern they might become a majority in the military, but even that is a question. So on the other hand, what happens in Chechnya when Kadyrov goes is anybody's guess. And the entire North Caucasus is still a threatening area for Russia.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. I just would be interested in getting your take on a potential reassurance force in Ukraine in order to guarantee any ceasefire or deal that's reached. How likely is it, do you think, that we will see European troops in Ukraine on the line of contact guaranteeing a ceasefire? And how likely is it that the US will provide a credible backstop to that European reassurance force? And what tools can we use to pressure Russia in order to agree to any deal?
The Europeans are pushing hard to do something. They are concerned that if they have to deal with Putin alone, it could be ugly. They had counted on America to do something. Trump keeps waffling on that. What Putin just did in Poland think makes the Europeans even more nervous in two directions. One is they think they got to do something because if Ukraine loses this war, then they've got Russia much closer to their border. On the other hand, if they send in troops, it could be World War III. Putin could follow through with the Medvedev nuclear threats. It is a very dangerous time, and it is a time when most of us thought America would be standing up and helping to defend democracy and NATO, and we really don't know, and that is scary. But the only way this ends in the near term is if Putin either goes or sees defeat and decides he'd better make the best deal he can before it's too late. But that is going to require giving Ukraine what it needs, and we're not doing anywhere near enough on that yet.
Thank you.
One more last question.
I wonder if you can do a sort of psychoanalysis of Putin. Like, can you just give us an analysis of what goes into his mind? We've read reports that he cares about imagery, but what exactly does he see the world to be? What does he care, if he cares at all, about leadership, about people, about suffering? Just give us a walk through Putin's mind.
Got another half hour? Okay. I guess what you need to know about Putin, and maybe the only thing you need to know about Putin, is that in 1985, when he got to Dresden, and he was furnishing their apartment, he got his stereo equipment from the Red Brigades, the Baader-Meinhof gang. Now, it was not unusual for the KGB and later the FSB to work with the mafia when they needed to. Putin worked with a number of gangs in St. Petersburg when he was deputy mayor. He was the first Russian official after the breakup of the Soviet Union to be publicly accused in a legislative body of corruption. A woman named Maria Salia, who was a good friend of one of our best friends, was able to find that since he was responsible for a lot of economic stuff and emergency assistance, he turned $150 million of US food aid into either nothing or 2 railroad cars full of sunflower seeds. And she tried to get the Petersburg Assembly to look into this and do something about it, and it got quashed. She ended up having to flee to Pskov, right on the border with Ukraine, and just kind of disappear and died of natural causes in the end. When he was first deputy mayor and handling foreign economic relations in St. Petersburg, a lot of businessmen and even some American diplomats started the story that he was the only honest Russian official, because he never asked for a bribe. What they missed, and what Karen DeWisha showed in her book, is that he didn't need it, because as first deputy mayor, he ran the mayor's contingency fund, which took 25% off the top of every foreign economic contract. So, and where some of that money went, we can only guess. We know that he had a lot of it in his mattress in the dacha community that he and some colleagues put together, the ozera, the lake. And like a lot of Russians, he kept the money in the mattress, and when the place burned, he lost it, which is why he was so desperate to get a decent job in Moscow after Sobchak lost the election, where Putin was his campaign manager. And we know that in 2008, when he was stepping down as president, the castling move with Medvedev, where Putin became prime minister, Medvedev became president for a term. The port of St. Petersburg had about $1 billion appropriated for renovations, and Putin was building his palace near Sochi and kept going back and forth about how to use the money, and in the end he took the whole $1 billion. So does he care? It's not clear. Sorry. I wish he did.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Still stay here for a little bit. Maybe somebody personally wants to answer a question. Are you going to stay here for a little bit? Maybe somebody. Okay, cool. What? Okay. Thank you very much all for coming.